Welcome to the SME Funding in Horizon 2020 webinar. I am Xavier Aubry, and on behalf of all of us at ZAS Ventures, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this short introduction to the Horizon 2020 program for SMEs. Today, we have about 45 minutes, including some Q&A, set aside to learn about the funding schemes available to SMEs under the Horizon 2020 program from the European Commission. In 2014 and 2015, we have developed around 20 successful funding applications for a total funding of 42 million euros. And this seminar is really an opportunity for us to share the lessons learned in the first year of this program. I'd like to remind you that if you would like more information, or if you have ideas on other webinars, future topics for webinars, feel free to drop us an email on the address listed below the slide. All right, so today's agenda is to go over a number of myths that you may have heard of regarding EC funding, which are not always true, far from this, in fact. We'll also describe the SME instrument in detail. What does it mean for a company? What kind of funding? What are the requirements? We'll discuss the evaluation process, which is very important to understand if you want to have good chances of success, as well as the statistics, which may vary depending on the phase and the topic. And finally, we'll discuss about how to pick the right companies in your portfolios that would be the best ones to apply for this program and benefit from it. We'll discuss in particular which phase of the program they should target and also which topic. And finally, discussing a little bit about successful applications. Again, please feel free at any time to drop a question in the chat box, and we will make sure we address it at the end of this presentation. A few words about us. We are a consultancy specialized in writing applications, funding applications, in particular in the Horizon 2020 framework. This is not a shameless advertising plug. We want to explain here that, and in contrast with most of the consultancies out there, we have decided to work purely on success fees. And that is a fairly big difference because we are targeting schemes which have an average success rate between 3 and 5%. So this is the kind of programs that we're applying to together with our customers. And our success fee model means that we are going to select really, really hard the companies we work with. So we will actually act as a filter for you. You can present us with 10 companies you think could be applying, and we'll tell you which ones do really have chances. And of course, it also makes sure that we are fully aligned with the incentives of the company because, we only get paid if they get the funding. If they don't, we get zero, which means that we will spend between 1 and 3 months developing the application from scratch with our team, which is a mix of business and technical people. We'll submit it, we'll wait for the results, and we will only receive a portion of the funding that they receive when they receive it. So we are fully back-to-back with the cash flows of your companies. Now, there has been a number of discussion about EC funding and what's good and what's bad, and I thought we should summarize that for you. On the good side, the Commission has now started to fund projects which are closer to market. So we're not talking anymore about pure research funding, as it was the case in previous frameworks like FP7. Now we're talking about close to market innovation, typically companies who are about to launch a product to market and they are 1 or 2 years from that. It could also be that they already have a product on the market, but they are working on the next generation. What's really important about the EC funding is that it is a non-dilutive instrument because the money is given by the Commission and there's no equity exchange. This is a pure grant. Also, it is not a loan. It does not get reimbursed if the company is successful. It does not get reimbursed if the company fails with the project, as long as they have implemented the actions that were described in the activities which were planned with the Commission. So the grant is really based on the effort which is dedicated to the project, not the result. Another good thing is that you will get a clear yes/no answer after the submission, typically 1 or 2 months after the submission, and that's really important because you don't have to wait for an extended period of time, like sometimes in fundraising mode. Finally, the funding is significant. It can be up to 2.5 million euro for a single company, sometimes even more. We'll see that later. And the company will receive some pre-financing. So they will receive as much as 35% of the total funding before the project starts. On the negative side, the scheme has become extremely popular, leading to very low success rates. There's simply not enough money from the European Commission to provide to all of the good or excellent companies. The success rates are on average around 5%, but they go down to around 2 or 3% on the most popular topic, like for example ICT and health or manufacturing. But there are other topics which are a bit less competitive, like transportation or space, and we'll come back to that later. When you apply for these grants, you have to keep in mind that the time to grant is given. I mean, it's not something that you can reduce or shortcut. It will take between 6 to 12 months to get the money because you first have to write the application, which takes anywhere between 1 and 3 months. Then you have to apply, wait for the response, and then there is a phase during which the Commission will negotiate the grant with you, set up all the administration process before the project can start. That, of course, takes time. It cannot be reduced, and that is why if you have companies that want to extend their runway and are under really high cash flow pressure, EC money is not a good option because you will not get something within the next 3 months. However, you can get these large grants, 2.5 million euros, within a 6 to 12 months timeline. So if you have enough time to do this, you can plan ahead and include that into your funding cycles. The applications are relatively complex, so you have to keep in mind that it will require significant time from the management team. For example, we estimate that you will need to allocate a technical person and a business person to an application for a period of 3 months, not full time, but probably 25% of the time. This is not something you can do on the corner of a table in the weekends. And of course, management teams of your companies are really busy. They don't have the time to do this. This is why companies like us can help them outsource that effort and risk. There is some reporting overhead related to the projects simply because the Commission is giving money in exchange for an activity plan, and they do have to track that activity plan. So you do have to report to them. The company has to. And that requires a little bit extra overhead compared to a standard project. But it's not that much, and most importantly, it is also covered by the funding. So the overhead, the administration overhead, is funded by the Commission also. The money is given in installments, so it's during the course of the project that you will receive the money, but again, you will get some money up front, around 35%. There's been a number of myths that are still moving around when you talk about EC funding, and the number one myth is that you need to lobby in Brussels. You need to know people to be able to get your application funded, or at least to have higher chances. That is totally incorrect, simply because applications are evaluated by third-party evaluators which are completely independent. They are not even employee of the Commission. They get contracted only for the purpose of the evaluation. It's a fairly large pool, so we wouldn't be able to even know who they are. If you were to talk to all of them, that would be very difficult. You can't even know who they are. So the process is really not possible to influence. Another myth is that some countries have been advantaged by the Commission simply because EU wants to help with macroeconomic recovery of countries like Spain, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, etc. That's not the reality either. The countries which have the largest number of grants are also the ones which have the largest number of applications. And it is true that Spain has a very large number because they have a lot of applicants, simply because they don't have a lot of national funding available. So the companies are turning to EU funding. And there are other countries, bigger countries like France or UK, who has a very strong national funding program, which need a bit less EU funding. So there are less applications when you compare it to the size of the country. It is also true that Eastern European countries are really poor at succeeding in these schemes, mostly because they lack the infrastructure, support infrastructure to build good applications, in particular consultancies that do that very well in other countries. So clearly the process is neutral in terms of country. One issue is that the funds might seem to come late, and that's not true either. There is pre-financing, as we said, and then once a period has been reported, the Commission will pay for all of the effort that has been happening in the previous period. So it is paid in arrear, that is correct, except that there is pre-financing to cover the needs up to 35%. So the project is really cash flow negative only for a short period of time at the end of year 1 and a little bit at the end of year 2 before the reporting is complete. Another myth is that there is a lot of red tape, and it is true that we see European Commission as a bureaucratic entity with lots of paper pusher. In Horizon 2020, the Commission has made a real effort in making this simpler for SMEs, streamlining the application process, but also the reporting process during the project. Of course, there is still reporting. The Commission needs to establish if you have developed the activity plan that you've promised them in exchange for the funding, and that will require some reporting. Some of it is really standard project-based accounting, and some of it is technical reporting. Nothing out of the ordinary, but obviously it has to be planned and budgeted in the project. Some have complained that the EC fundings level are too low. It requires a really high level of co-financing. That is not the case anymore. The average funding rate is 70% of the cost. So if the company spends 100 euro, they are allowed to add 25% of overhead, which covers indirect costs, office rent, accounting, and so on. And they will receive 70% of that 125. So in fact, for each 100 euro spent, they get 87.5 euro from the Commission, and they only have to fund themselves 12.5 euro. There's also an option to report the time from founders or shareholders of the company who do not have a salary. In that case, the Commission will not have to look for a cash outflow. They will only report the time, and they will get money for that. Finally, it is not true anymore that the EC funds only research, because this instrument, the SM instrument, has been specifically created to fund close-to-market innovation. So if we look at the different funding alternatives for SMEs, clearly the European Commission has spent a lot of time and money funding research. And if you look at the total size of the budget, Horizon 2020 has a budget of over 70 billion euros over 7 years. Actually, it's closer to 77 billion. But some of it is looking at closer to market. And the Commission is using a tool called the TRL, Technology Readiness Level, which comes from NASA. And based on that, will decide what kind of funding goes to whom. So companies which are applying for innovation funding typically have a TRL above 6. They have a prototype that has been demonstrated with beta customers. And within that innovation package, there is this SME instrument which has been allocated 2.5 billion euros over 7 years. So it's not insignificant. In fact, if we compare it with the money that is being raised in startup, seed, and later stage, well, you can see here that 350 million euros are added to the pot by the European Commission. And this can support your companies to grow further. It can provide additional means without incurring any dilution. So it's very beneficial for early investors like yourselves, and of course for the founders. The SM instrument is not the only instrument available for this type of funding. And so be careful when you talk about funding, because if you approach your companies and you ask them, have you heard about this great H2020 and why are you not applying? Some of them might say, oh, no, I don't want this. It's too complicated. There's too many companies. We need to build a big consortium. It's not going to work. And when they say that, they're actually referring to other instruments like the collaborative projects, which are very interesting as well, but they typically fund research at 100% of the cost, and they require a different setup. Typically a consortium of 8, 10, 15 companies building together something, and of course over a longer period of time. what we're discussing today is the SME instrument, but there are other types of instruments available to the SMEs as well. The SME instrument has specific characteristics that make it very attractive. First of all, you can apply it as a single entity. So your portfolio as a company, as an SME, can go in, file a project at their own name without any partner and claim up to 2.5 million euros or even more, because in certain topics like healthcare, biotech, the limit is actually 5 million euros. It's higher because it includes things like clinical trials, which require quite significant amount of money. The instrument is purely dedicated to SMEs, so you're not allowed to apply if you're a large enterprise, an academic partner, or a research group, for example. The definition of SMEs is very specific. It's typically a company below 250 employees, and which also has a balance sheet with less than 43 million euros. So most of the companies in your portfolio would fit with that category. Be just careful with one thing. If a company is owned at more than 25% by a corporate, it might not be an SME anymore. It depends, again, who is owning it. If it's a venture fund, that doesn't really count. But if it's owned by a large corporate, it's directly, then the company will not be considered an SME anymore. If you're not really sure, you can ask us. There is a definition that we can refer you to know if the SME is qualifying as an SME. For these projects, there are 4 annual cutoffs, so you have different chances. You can apply in different times of the year, and you can also resubmit if you're not successful at the first one. The evaluation process is really specific, and it's worth spending a bit of time on that. As I said before, the evaluators are third-party experts contracted by the Commission to provide independent advice on who should get funded. And to do this, what the experts are doing is that they are scoring each application on an evaluation grid, resulting in a score out of 15. And the Commission will take the median score of these 4 different experts in order to produce the final evaluation of the proposal. Then they will rank the application based on their scores, and they will start distributing the money from the top. So the challenge here is that you need to score really high to get funded, because there is only a small amount of money available for each cutoff and each topic. This is an example of an evaluation summary report for a project which was applied in the food topic. This is a Swedish SME, and as you can see here, they have a total budget of 2.4 million euros. They requested 1.7 million of funding. And they scored, with the application work we did for them, they scored 14.4 out of 15, which is an excellent score. And in this case, they finished first of the call and they got the funding. But other companies who may have scored above the technical threshold, for example, about 13.5, may not have gotten funded because the money ran out at this point. So the applications, they're really, really competitive. That's what you have to keep from that. And we see that from the distribution of scoring. When we see a particular topic, a lot of applications will end up in the average category, and they won't be funded, obviously. But some of them will be good, but not funded because the money has run out. And only the top applications will receive funding. What does it mean in terms of effort? We often have companies coming to us after having scored already good, and they feel that they're very close to getting the project funded, but that is not the case, because the effort required to bring a project from good to excellent is the same as building it from scratch. So you can say that the effort is really exponential, because it is so difficult to get these extra points, and that is really where we can see an arms race going on, where a lot of companies are calling consultants, and the level of applications is becoming higher and higher and higher. So unless you have a fantastic writer in your own team and he has time to do this, it will be very difficult to get funded. But for those who can allocate the right resources or external help, then there is this chance of getting funded. And obviously, having done 20 of these applications successfully, we can testify about this. The success rates will vary depending on topics. So it's really important to keep in mind that some topics are less competitive. For example, you can see here transport and space, while some other topics are really competitive, in particular ICT, health, manufacturing, and business model innovation. So when you look through your portfolio, clearly you can start thinking in terms of what would be the priority companies, and you can select those based on the success rates of the topics. Success rate is a result of the competitive pressure on the call, how many applicants versus how much budget, because the budgets are not equivalent for all of these topics. So how do you select the right company? There are a number of things that are must-have, requirements without which the company has very little chance of success. First of all, as we discussed before, the technology readiness level has to be high enough, which means an initial product or service prototype that has been tested with customers. Whether they're alpha or beta customers doesn't really matter, but there need to be something available. It could also be that there's already a product on the market and now the company is building the next generation. The company should also have done their homework in terms of IPR, which means a freedom to operate analysis. They need to understand their patent landscape, but also having an IPR strategy. And in some fields, patents might not be the right way to do it. For example, for software, it could be other ways to protect. And that has to be redefined because the Commission puts a lot of emphasis on how can those companies defend their IPR after they start getting successful. The company should also have done their homework in terms of market analysis. So understanding their users, but also understanding how much they can pay for the service. So there need to be some kind of pricing. And we can't say in the application that we're not sure yet, but we'll test the market in the project. There need to be some early understanding of the willingness to pay. The company should understand their competitive landscape. So, of course, the competition, which is already out there in the market, but also some of the research effort that might come to market later. So, essentially a state-of-the-art analysis and highlighting what technology innovation will make them superior to the existing competition as well as to the future competition. The typical project size that we recommend are between 2.5 and 3.5 million euros. That's the budget. Remember that the Commission will pay 70% of that. If you have a higher budget, that you can still apply. You will just get the maximum 2.5 million euro, and then you will have to co-fund a larger part. If you have a smaller project, we do not recommend to apply, or we recommend to try to increase the size of your project. And no, it's not because we are on success fees. It's simply because large projects will have a higher impact. So when they are compared to smaller projects, the evaluators will always favor them, unfortunately. Even if they are being told that they should evaluate them separately and even small projects could be nice, in practice, we see that the average project size is around 2.8, 2.9 million euros. The company should also have the capabilities, obviously both technical and commercial, and if they don't have them, they should have a clear plan to get those resources on board in order to implement the plan that they have in mind, for which they are requiring the funding. And finally, the Commission has these societal challenges that they have defined, and obviously the more aligned you are with those challenges, the better chances to impress the evaluators. These are high-level challenges, things like digital single markets, clean energy, secure transportation, things like that. There's a list of them available on many EU websites, which we can refer you to. So these are the key requirements for a company to apply. Now, where to apply? Because there are actually 3 phases for these instruments, but the real interesting one is phase 2. So I'll quickly describe the other ones. Phase 1 is a very simple feasibility study, and for this phase you only get 50,000 euro lump sum from the Commission. So it's not really serious money, but it can be useful if the company feels that they do need to do a bit more market analysis. And companies going to phase 1 first before going to phase 2 have a small advantage when they apply to phase 2. Phase 2 is the real money, up to 2.5 million euros, as we mentioned. And that money can cover activities like improving the prototype, testing, demonstrating with customers, so creating a beta user program, scaling up the technology, replicating the technology. Maybe it's deployed in one particular market or industry and you want to deploy it in more market and more industries. And this is really what has to be done during this project. The funding is not meant for developing from scratch the technology, because it has to be TRL 6 or above. And it's not meant for launching the technology. So the Commission doesn't want to see things like marketing expense on your budget, but every activity in between. And finally, there is a phase 3, which is not funded by the EC directly, but the Commission is planning to use the SME instrument as a seal of credibility, as a brand, to attract more investments. So for you early investors in the company, it's very interesting, because the company who will actually get this funding in phase 2 will then be admitted to a very select community which will benefit from the EC support to raise more funds. They will be introduced to investors, to procurers, to large corporate customers, and the Commission wants to promote these success stories and make sure that the companies they've invested in will get more funding and more business. These are the 13 topics that you have available, and when you get the slides, each of them is linked directly to the website of the Commission. Keep in mind that those topics are bottom-up, so they are on purpose very generic, to the exception of the healthcare one, healthcare biotechnology, which is focusing purely on cell technologies, but everything else is very broad. So when they say, for example, small business innovation research for transport and smart cities mobility, it means essentially any technology that can apply to transport or smart cities. So very easy to fit in, which is also why this is so competitive. The budgets vary depending on the funding, but they have a tendency to increase over time, and that is a good sign. You can see that there will be in total over 740 million euros allocated to companies in the next 2 years. And that will continue, of course, in 2018, 19, and 2020. So what do you do once you've talked to your companies and they say, yeah, we just think it's very interesting, but we just don't have the time? You know, you asking us to push and to make sure that we execute on our plan, and we don't have time to put 2 founders on this for 6 weeks. That's where consultancy is coming, and I think a common way of developing these applications has been to ask consultancies. There are other sources of help. For example, each country has so-called national contact points for SMEs, which are giving advice on these programs. There's also a network called Europe Enterprise Network, which has specific advisors or coaches. But these people don't write applications. They can give advice on if it's a good application, or maybe how to improve it, but they will not write from scratch. And in fact, they don't write applications. It's not their job. So consultancies, on the other hand, they write applications. However, what you don't want is go for a consultancy that will give you a package where you have to pay up front, because then there is no incentive for them to filter you. I mean, they want to get the money, and they will get some money anyway. The best way is, of course, to get advice from people who have 100% incentive to succeed, if that is possible. And in our case, it is. So that's what our approach would be. But of course, consultants are not a requirement. They just will help you do a better job. There are companies who have been successful with their own teams to apply to these programs. But it's a decision on time and risk of the work. And our recommendation, obviously, is to outsource that risky work to a company that does it for a living. These are a few success stories. We thought that we wanted to learn a bit from them, so maybe finish up with that. This gives you an idea of what kind of companies are getting funded. I'll briefly say a few words about some of them. The first one, Citrimac, is a project for air cargo. It's an intelligent cargo transportation container that knows when it's been opened and where. So you can secure the content, and that is really important because, as you probably know, there's a lot of theft going on in cargo transport, but more importantly, there is a terrorist risk because it is not physically possible to screen 100% of the cargo. So unfortunately, there is no way to know what happened, and you probably remember this incident where some printer cartridges had been loaded with explosives, and they were coming from an airport in Northern Africa. So this is what we are solving with this technology. In this case, actually, it's a consortium of 4 SMEs that got the funding. There are more exotic technologies as well. Doremir is an ICT company focusing on music recognition technology. They make sure that if you're humming a song or playing it on an instrument, then the system can automatically transform it into a musical score. And that's a very popular application now for music professionals and even amateurs. We have a company in energy, BioValue, who is doing X-ray real-time analysis of biomass in order to assess its characteristic before it's going for in the energy chain. A cybersecurity company, CyberWiz, that is a Swedish SME, and they have technology that allows a large critical infrastructure provider, for example, an energy provider, to do an audit of their security systems and to modelize the risk depending on the network configuration. And obviously this is typically where we see a good fit, a very strong fit with the Commission societal challenges. Cybersecurity is a big issue for the Commission, and the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, for example, energy providers, is even more important. Qbot is a company in the UK who has innovative robotics technology to provide insulation in all the buildings. So they actually are able to spray insulation material under the buildings using this robotic system. And they've been very successful with that in the UK, now expanding to Europe. Nanosol is a product from a company called Sol Voltaics. They're doing nanowire-based films to improve the capacity of solar cells. They've been extremely successful with the technology. They just announced this week a Series C funding of $12.5 million on top of the 1.7 million euros that they have gotten for this SM instrument project. iFoodBag, the company where I was mentioning in the evaluation phase, they have this intelligent carrier bag which can be produced at the cost of a paper bag but can keep the groceries cold for up to 24 hours. And that can really revolutionize how groceries are being shipped, for example, from online grocery firms, but even when you're going yourself to the grocery store. Soma Analytics company developing a smartphone-based solution for stress management. So they actually embed their solution into a corporate wellness program, and this program is a 28-day program, helps people to manage their stress at work more efficiently and to avoid things like burnout. SKL Carbon, a very successful company called Skeleton Technologies, and they're developing graphene-based ultracapacitors for different applications, but for example transport, and they've just secured a 3.5 million euro deal in road freight from a customer in France. So you can see here a number of companies who've been successful raising those funds. They are now implementing on their projects, and at the same time they're raising additional funds. They're getting customer deals like Skeleton, or they're raising additional VC money like Sol Voltaics. So this is a very interesting way of funding the growth. All right, I think our webinar is reaching close to an end. I will have a look at the chat now and respond to the questions. So there is a question here that is asking us if the companies applying for the grant need to be headquartered in Europe. That is actually a very interesting question. The legal entity applying for the grant has to be European based, yes, but we've seen cases of US companies, for example, who have set up a European subsidiary with a real goal of expanding in Europe and gotten the funding for the European expansion. So here we have to be a bit careful. Obviously the Commission and the reviewers will not like an application where it's obvious that it's a US company trying to siphon EU funds. But they will really like an application where it shows that the US company is really planning to expand in Europe and creating jobs in Europe. You also have to know that there are some so-called associated countries which are automatically part of Horizon 2020. For example, countries like Norway or Israel, and they are by default in the program, so they are allowed to ask for funds directly. There are, on the other hand, countries which have not been put in the program, like Switzerland. They are currently out of the SME instrument, but they can request funds from other instruments. So I think in this case, you have to look at the case-by-case basis. I can describe, for example, we recently write an application for a ocean energy company. That is a US company that developed the technology with DOE, Department of Energy funds, and now they're really planning an expansion in Europe. They've gotten some early grants from Scotland to implement the technology in Scotland, and they have a team in the UK. So they've applied for that grant, and that grant would be used to fund the hiring and the expansion of the plans in Europe. Another question is about if we are going to share this presentation. Absolutely, it will be available as a follow-up to you guys together with the recording. So you feel free to refer to it. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said on this program. There are a lot of nuances and ways to attack the problem. Again, the best way for you is to engage with us. Either refer directly your portfolio companies or discuss with us to identify companies. What we've done for a number of known venture capital funds in Europe is to have a meeting where we would review a number of their portfolio companies, and we would give them advice on who we think should be a good candidate. And we can narrow down to 5, 6 companies which would be ideal, and then approach them one by one, making sure that they are sold in the idea and that we can do a good job for them. So again, feel free to think about contacting us when you come across these companies. All right. I don't think there's any other questions on the chat right now. Thanks again for joining. It was a pleasure to host this webinar. Again, we'll have other webinars on other topics. So I hope you'll be able to join us, and please do contact us if you would like more information or if you have ideas on specific topics for future webinars. I'm going to close the call now and wishing you a great day. Thank you. Have a nice day.